Hi guys, Christine here. Today I want to talk briefly about what has been happening in the news and a little bit about what it means to me personally and how it relates to our constitutional rights in Canada. As I'm sure you've all seen, there was a brutal and evil terrorist attack by the terrorist organization Hamas against Israeli civilians that included some of the worst crimes that I could have imagined, nightmarish stuff that targeted children, babies, mothers and grandmothers, grandfathers. There are innocent people who have been taken hostage and into Gaza, which is now being bombed by Israel in response. And Hamas has said that today, Friday, October 13th, is an international day of rage where they will target Jewish people around the world. There are police posted in front of Jewish schools and synagogues in Canada. I have not been able to get out of my mind the images of these crimes, which I have seen distributed across social media. I have Jewish family, and one of the things that has disturbed me so deeply is to see that there are people walking among us, fellow Canadians, who have celebrated the murder of innocent people, of babies, of kids at concerts, and these fellow Canadians would celebrate the murder of my family. Now, whatever your views on Palestinian resistance, this is not resistance. These are atrocities. This is evil. This is terrorism. It is disgusting. And the people who are celebrating it should be ashamed. This has been one of the worst massacres of Jews since the Holocaust. And if you want to celebrate that, you disgust me. Now, I went to the rally over the weekend for Israel at Mel Lastman Square in Toronto. On my way there, I saw people who had come for a rally for Palestine, people who sympathize with the terrorist organization Hamas, people who want to march in approval of the massacre, people who lack all moral decency, marching on our streets to celebrate unambiguous acts of cruelty and monstrosity. So, what do I think of these Hamas protests? I think we must let these idiots march. And I don't agree with calls to suppress those disgusting and vile demonstrations. There have been a number of such calls. For example, Toronto City Councillors Brad Bradford and James Pasternak asked Mayor Olivia Chow to stop the pro-Hamas rally near City Hall. Mayor Chow has said that she will be bringing a motion to create safety zones, the details of which are still unclear to me. And France actually banned the pro-Hamas demonstrations in that country, although the protests proceeded anyway. And today, on Hamas's Day of Rage, a French school teacher was stabbed to death. Now, I understand the desire to shut down the hate rallies. I absolutely do, because I find them disgusting, but they are legal. Freedom of peaceful assembly and expression is a constitutional right that even these loser idiots have. And as the Toronto Police have correctly pointed out, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is the supreme law, and it supersedes any municipal policy that might include the requirement for, say, a permit. Now, my colleague Joanna Barron has written about this in the online publication, The Hub, and I'll link to that in the description below. She's written about several, legal intellectuals who have mused that those pro-Hamas demonstrations might reach that rare threshold of counseling terrorist acts under the criminal code, and therefore she says these intellectuals say maybe they should be forbidden because they're counseling terrorism. Now, I'm pretty skeptical of that. It's true that counseling terrorist acts applies to such acts whether in Canada or abroad, but there is very little case law on what counseling actually consists of, and the criminal law requires clarity and precision. Now, that doesn't mean there shouldn't be arrests. Peaceful protest is a protected activity under the Charter, and so is the right to freedom of expression and assembly, but obviously unlawful acts can be committed in the course of expressing those rights, and police have the right to arrest people for breaches of the peace, for mischief, for taking part in a riot. Finally, there's also the prohibition on hate speech, which is speech that rises to the standard of encouraging intense detestation, vilification against a specified group. And you know, whether it's good or not, that is criminalized in Canada, unlike in the United States. It's criminal under Section 319 of the Criminal Code. And given the notorious subjectivity entailed in recognizing when the threshold of hate speech has been crossed, most municipal police forces in Canada have specialized hate crime units that have been deployed at the protests to make or gather evidence that could lead to arrests later on. But let's be clear. Acknowledging the rights of a disgusting Hamas sympathizer to gather and protest doesn't mean we should lessen our vigilance in denouncing and tracking them. As I've said, I've had Jewish family, and I know that anti-Semitism is the most ancient form of hatred, and it's always seemed to bubble just below the surface of all humanity, and it always will, and we see it just breaking the surface right now. I also know that anti-Semitism accelerates extremely rapidly, and that's what we're seeing happen right now. But I also think that there is some value in allowing these rallies to go ahead because it lets us know who among our fellow Canadians, and how many of them there are, who choose to spend their Thanksgiving holiday weekend celebrating atrocities committed against vulnerable and innocent civilians. I want to see their faces in the sunlight and condemn their depravity with my full voice. I don't want to use the criminal law to suppress them and drive them to fester underground. I also think if some of these individuals progress from peaceful protesters to aiding and abetting in hate crimes or even terrorist acts abroad, allowing them to march in public could create some of that valuable circumstantial evidence that could be used to prevent them from, for example, gaining citizenship or prosecuting them if they commit or conspire or attempt to commit terrorism abroad. I hope that CSIS was present at Nathan Phillips Square on Monday. And finally, remember that we should also prosecute those who donate to and fund the terrorist activities of Hamas, even if the current federal government had stopped investigations into charities that seem to be funneling money to terrorist organizations. Now, an interesting development today, Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative Party leader, was asked about the issue of banning these Hamas protests. And I know that there are individuals in his caucus who I really respect, but some of them have called for these protests to be banned. And look, I don't usually expect a lot from politicians, but Poilievre did have a principled stand, and I will play it for you now.
You said about the protest, and we are all aware that the France has already imposed a ban on these kind of protests. And do you think Canada should follow the same footsteps? We should do the same.
We, as conservatives, believe in freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of association. People are free to state their own opinions, even opinions that I find abhorrent. That said, I'm free to state my opinion, which is that Hamas is a sadistic, terrorist death cult, and it must be defeated. And I find it abhorrent that anyone in Canada or anywhere else would show their support for Hamas. I will add, though, it is already a criminal offense to provide material support to a listed terrorist entity. That includes Hamas. So if anybody is found to provide, that's, whether it's a donation or recruitment or coordination or any other material support to Hamas, then the police must enforce the anti-terror laws and arrest them for that criminal code offense. Thank you.
Okay, next question.
Now, I agree with that take. As sick as it makes me, these protests are legal. I can't, in a principled way, call for protests on topics that I support to be allowed while simultaneously saying we should ban the protests that disgust me. That would be deeply hypocritical. Now, I'm pleased to see that Pierre Poilievre sees it the same way. Now, this has been a really hard few days for me and for my family and for every Jewish person. So please keep us all in your thoughts. Thanks for watching.